The graphic on the screen obviously tells you that we are starting a new series on the biblical character of Joshua. Joshua is, well, it's actually cool. So we're going to be in this series alongside Building A, which is the building that most of your parents attend service at. I like when those match up because I think it's one of the easiest ways to start a conversation after service. Most of you are going to go to lunch or you're just going to hang out with your families or whatever the case is. And when we're talking about the exact same Bible passages as they're talking about over there, messages will obviously be a little bit different, but we're going to look at the same passage of scripture. So to have a conversation afterwards when, your parent is like, hey, what'd they talk about in church today? Here's a cheat code for the next 2 months. They talked about the exact same thing that they talked about over there in Building A, but obviously I think it generates really, really cool conversations. And I've said this before, if we gather together and all that comes of it is that we listen to a lecture and then nothing changes. This could be a little crude, and but you could interpret that as someone just wasting their time if nothing changes outside of the gathering. And I think one of the easiest ways for us to take what we talk about in here and apply it and try to kind of meet God beyond the church campus is for us to just have conversations. And I think the next couple of months will prove to make that a little bit easier when it comes to what we're talking about and stuff.
Yeah. And so given that it is the first day in this series, naturally, we are going to be looking at the early years of Joshua's life today. And so if you know anything about Joshua, you know that eventually he became one of the greatest leaders in the Bible. But before that, he was actually just Moses' assistant. And we all know who Moses is. Most of us know who Moses is. But in the passages that we're going to read today, you'll see that he did not start off as a big deal. Joshua did not. But he was actually being prepared to be the leader that he was in the background. He was fighting battles, following orders, and just quietly growing in his relationship to God over the years before he became the leader of a nation. And this morning, I am going to ask Anthony some questions around just that idea of how God develops leaders before they're even recognized.
Yeah, and I'll just throw out there that this is one of those topics that if I'm just being honest, I'm uniquely passionate about. And I think one of the reasons for that is the cultural narratives that we all swim in are so strong here. And they're actually so subtle that I think it can be really easy for us to just kind of follow suit with what culture says about becoming great or what culture says about becoming a leader. Because think of it, most of us in this room, you're growing up in some kind of Christian home, right? You're here on a Sunday morning. So more than likely, the majority of us are growing up with Christianity as kind of this north arrow. Oh yeah, we want to be like that. Well, it usually becomes very clear what the ideals of Christianity are and how they differ from the world. So there's certain moral things that we're not going to compromise on or we don't want to compromise on, whatever the case. So it's hey, we want to follow Jesus. We want to do these things and we don't want to do these other things that, maybe the world practices or whatever. However, when it comes to success, when it comes to leadership, when it comes to greatness, the line starts to get a lot blurrier. And I think in a world where so many of us, consciously and unconsciously, subconsciously, whichever the word is, where so many of us can find influencers or successful people who look like they are living a really good life, it's natural to kind of latch on to their way of life because it looks like it'll produce, their way of life will produce the outcomes of their life. And even as Christians, it can be really, it can be a subtle shift into our definition of greatness just being different from Jesus's because we are taking our cues from people in culture. And I think with Joshua's life, we'll get into it in just a second, he actually gives us a really good biblical model of what it looks like to become great, what it looks like to become a leader. And I think there's gonna be a lot of things that we can learn.
Yeah, and so your job today, as you listen, is to think about the early years of Joshua's life as we talk about them and maybe connect them to your experience. So as we look at his story, consider what if what you're doing right now, although no one sees it and maybe you feel invisible, what if it's actually building something that God can use later? Or the difficult things that you're going through, what if those are the things that actually are going to start building the strength and the courage in you that it's going to be used later on for God to do great things with? And so we're just going to jump right into our first set of verses, which is when we're actually introduced to Joshua. They'll be on the screen. It's Exodus 17, 8 through 13. And I'm going to read from the screen as well. It says, the Amalekites came and attacked the Israelites at Rephidim. Moses said to Joshua, "Choose some of our men and go out to fight the Amalekites."
I'm just kidding. Yeah,
every
you can
time.
say whatever. It doesn't matter.
"Tomorrow I will stand on top of the hill with the staff of God in my hands." So Joshua fought the Amalekites as Moses had ordered, and Moses, Aaron, and Hur went to the top of the hill. As long as Moses held up his hands, the Israelites were winning, but whenever he lowered his hands, the Amalekites were winning. When Moses' hands grew tired, they took a stone and put it under him, and he sat on it. Aaron and Hur held his hands up, one on one side, one on the other, so that his hands remained steady till sunset. Joshua overcame the Amalekite army with the sword. And so this series is all about how God forms leaders, but the first time that we're actually introduced to Joshua, as we just read, he isn't quite leading yet. He is actually following another leader, like we said, Moses. Why do you think that detail is important about Joshua?
Because it's actually probably the general pattern for how people become great or how people become leaders in general. If you think about Simone Biles training in a gym in Texas for most of her life before she ever hits an Olympic stage, or you think about Michael Jordan getting cut from his high school basketball team and having to train just to get back on that team. You think about Howard Schultz, who is like a billionaire today, pitching business ideas for years to hundreds and hundreds of investors and nobody investing in any of his ideas. All three of those people are household names in their industry today. Everyone looks at their lives and they go, wow, they're so successful, so accomplished. All three of those people were doing the exact same thing that they're famous for today for years when no one was watching and when no one was giving them attention for it, when no one knew their name. And the simple idea is that as humans, like both in terms of our character and our talent, our gifts and our abilities, all that stuff develops in the dark. Malcolm Gladwell, he talks about this in his book on Outliers, where he kind of popularized the 10,000 hour rule. And it's just the idea that in order for anyone to become great at anything, whatever your skill is, whatever you hope to, go into your profession to be later on in life, most of the research out there would suggest that in order to become great, like an expert level achiever, you usually have to invest about 10,000 hours in that craft. And I think athletics is always the most obvious example here. So, if you ever watch a great player in a championship game, nobody becomes great during a championship game. You either already were great or you were not. You either already knew how to handle pressure, you already knew how to handle the moment and the spotlight, or you didn't. Everyone understands, like, when you see an athlete perform, that is years of practice and hard work in gyms or training centers that no one ever noticed. And the reason that this idea is, I think, so important in our kind of cultural moment is because culturally, just because of celebrity culture in America and some of the ripple effects of social media, it can be really easy and natural for us to confuse popularity with performance, or for us to confuse popularity with effectiveness. So if you think about maybe some of the most popular college athletes over the past couple of years, I think with the exception of Caitlin Clark, most of the most popular athletes were not the best. From Shedeur Sanders to Livy Dunn to Bronny James, like the people who are making the most money, they have the most, they for sure have the most sponsors and all that stuff. No one thinks they're actually the best at what they do. And that's not a shot at them, but it's to say that culturally, we are all familiar with popularity as a metric of success. And the danger with that is that as young people, we can start to value becoming popular more than we value getting better, whether that's in our talent, whether that's with our character. The example of Joshua here is he was serving Moses for years before anyone knew him as the guy. And I think the idea for us is simply that he gives us an example of what it looks like to value hard work over being well known, to actually value in seasons, where you're developing in the dark, where you're growing, where your character is growing, where your talent, where you're getting better at whatever it is that you care about. Joshua is an example of someone who values hard work over just being well known.
Well, to clarify, would you say then what you're not saying is that popularity is a bad thing.
No, it's not. It's not inherently bad. It's like popularity is what it is. If you get popular, if you gain influence in any, at school or whatever on social, like if you can get a following or if a following happens to you, so there is a little bit of difference
Right.
between like just being known for something and then working the algorithm so that you're known for something. It's a little different, but in general, like if you just become popular, I don't think that's a bad thing at all. That's just, it is what it is. I think the danger is when we care more about becoming popular, we care more about becoming well known than we do about getting better, than we do about our character and our talent. And I think that's what Joshua does here.
Yeah. And like he said, Joshua, he actually understood what hard work was. And if you remember in the passage that we read, he was actually the one doing the hard work, leading in battle below the mountain while Moses is on the mountain. So in that moment, while he was doing all the hard work fighting, he actually was not getting any attention. Instead, Moses was the one that people probably noticed in this moment. Moses is almost like, for lack of better words, like the star in this story. So what do you think that Joshua learned about leadership in that moment?
100%. I mean, the story is about Moses. So yeah, the way that, if you read the story, you're like, if you were to read that story in context, you were to go through the book of Exodus, at that point, you're like, Moses is still the main character. And this guy Joshua is just over here,
Fighting.
Doing his important work or whatever. But, and I think because if you look at the trajectory of Joshua's life as you move into kind of more of his book when he's the main character, you do see a, relatively mature and good example. So I would say one of the things that he would have had to have learned in that moment is that Joshua could not be the man that he wanted to be. He could not accomplish the things that he wanted to accomplish without the help of Moses, without the guidance of Moses, literally in that moment, without the prayers and the intercession of Moses. And I don't know why I'm using so many athletic metaphors today, so please forgive me if you don't care about sports. I just feel like they're effective for this context. One of my favorite sports journalists will often talk about how it works really well in football, American football. If you see a once-in-a-generation talent and like at the quarterback position, if you see someone who's really great, really gifted, really athletic, really smart, like all of it, you could take the best quarterback in the world. But if you put them on a bad team and you put them around bad teammates and bad coaches, they all by themselves do not have the power to change the organization, to change the team. They might do well. They might still rack up stats and, highlights and clips and stuff like that. But they will never accomplish everything they could accomplish without the right teammates and coaches and managers who are setting them up for success. And the idea is simply that even with Joshua here, he is experiencing, he could accomplish so much more in life if he's connected to the right people. And specifically in the example, it's Moses. It's a spiritual leader. This is one of the reasons why, we do small groups on Wednesday nights throughout the school year. It's not just so that we could gather together again and have another church service. We really believe in the power and the significance of spiritual relationships, of the fact that when we are connected to other people who want what's best for us, who are trying to help us grow closer to God, who are going to be positive examples, are going to be there for us, that has so much power over the course of a lifetime. All of a sudden, if you run back to the metaphor, like we become the quarterback who's joining a better team, and we are all of a sudden can accomplish so much more because there are other people who are helping us, pouring into us, all that stuff.
Yeah. And we didn't read this part in the Exodus passage that we pulled up, but after they had won the battle, God actually tells Moses, write all of this down, like don't forget about it. And he adds in this detail. He says, read it in front of Joshua, read it to Joshua, like everything that happened in this battle, the way that God was faithful to them. And I think that's such a cool detail because it emphasizes that point that we need people, and not just like peers, but that emphasizes the idea that we need people who are older, who are wiser, who have seen the faithfulness of God play out in their lives so that we can learn from it as the younger ones. And so it's something that we encourage you guys to implement in your lives, and we're probably always going to encourage it. And so, yes, small groups are like the natural way of creating that in your life. But let's move on. So there is another moment in Joshua's story early on in his life that shows him developing in the dark. And it's actually from Numbers chapters 13 and 14.
Yeah, so we won't read the full chapters, but we tell you them so that you can read them on your own time. The summarization of the story is actually a very popular Bible story. If you've grown up in church, it's, we refer to it as like when Joshua and the spies went to spy out the line of the land of Canaan. If you follow the biblical narrative from the beginning, you know that with Abraham and with Moses, like God tells them, hey, I'm going to give your people a land. I'm going to make you into a nation that's going to represent me to other nations. And the whole purpose of the nation of Israel is that they're supposed to be God's people who represent God's way to the rest of the world, because that's what Adam and Eve were supposed to do, but they failed. So then God starts over again. And as you follow the storyline, the nation of Israel gets to kind of the outside, the borders of the promised land. This is the land that they're supposed to go in and reside in and then be this positive, loving, blessing example to the rest of the world. Well, there are already people in that land, and the nation of Israel is supposed to go in and essentially take the land for themselves. And I'll just say this, as a sidebar, if you read the narrative, I'm talking from Genesis all the way through, we get through Joshua and Judges, there are some theological reasons for why things are happening the way that they're happening as well that we're not going to jump into. But the particular group that is in this land is often referred to as the Canaanites. And Deuteronomy chapter 12 actually talks about some of the immorality and some of the violence that is practiced by this nation. So there's some theological reasons for kind of God bringing his judgment into this place and the nation of Israel functioning as like his instrument for that. So they're called to go into the land and to settle there. Well, what Moses does is he gets together 12 guys and he's like, hey, I want you to go and look at the land. And I think some translations call them spies. We call them spies, which I don't know if they deserve that title. I feel like you're just kind of running there and you're looking and, it's like, all right, I see what I see. When I think of a spy, I think of the CIA. I'm getting sidetracked. So they're supposed to go into this area, look at the land, and then come back and give a report. And when they come back and give a report, there's 12 of them. 10 of them are like, guys, we're never going to win this battle. We're never going to, this is a bad idea. We should not try to go take this land. Those people are way bigger than us, way better than us, way more well-resourced. This is not a good idea. 2 guys, however, Joshua and Caleb, are saying the opposite. Well, maybe not the opposite, but they basically are going, hey, I think we can do this. I think God is on our side. I think we're going to be able to take care of this. And that's chapters 13 and 14.
Yes, and at the end of chapter 13 is what I want to talk about. So we're going to put the verses on the screen. This is what those 10 men, the spies, had told them when they got back. It says, we can't attack those people. They are stronger than we are. And they spread among the Israelites a bad report about the land they had explored. They said, we seemed like grasshoppers in our own eyes, and we looked the same to them. And now let's contrast that with what Joseph and Caleb said. Or Joshua. I feel like that's good.
It's fine. There's a lot of it, yeah.
Joshua and Caleb said, only do not rebel against the Lord, and do not be afraid of the people of the land, because we will devour them. Their protection is gone, but the Lord is with us. Do not be afraid of them. And so they went on the same mission. These guys all saw the same thing. Why do you think the reports are different?
Well, as you can see in the text, they saw the exact same thing, but they are focused on different things. And before I even get into that, if you want to go on YouTube and listen to PK's version of this message from Building A, it's really good. And he actually highlights just how significant it was that Joshua and Caleb were able to stand up in front of a nation and give a different perspective. Some scholars estimate that the nation of Israel was up to 2 million people at this time. So he does like this cool illustration. I saw it this morning where he shows the stadium of Michigan football, which I think seats like right under 110,000, and just tried to create the picture mentally of what it would look like to stand in the middle of that stadium full of people and to give a different perspective, to say one thing when everyone else is saying something different. And then I think the math is you multiply that stadium times like 18, I think. Wow. I could be wrong, but I probably am, it's math. But the fact that Joshua and Caleb were willing to stand in front of a group of people and give a different perspective, I mean, that's one of the marks of leadership. Leadership is, at times, not following what everyone else is saying, not following the way that everyone else is living. And part of the reason for why they're able to do that is because when the other guys are giving the report, notice how they highlight the way they see themselves and the way they see their situation. They come back and they say, we seemed like grasshoppers in our own eyes. In other words, hey, we don't have what it takes. We're not good enough. We're not prepared enough. And as they look at their situation, they went, this situation is way too complex. It's way too difficult. There's no hope. Their focus is on their ability and their situation. Contrast that with Joshua and Caleb, and their focus is on the fact that God is with them. And God told them, we were going to get this land. And you can see a totally different response as a result of what each group is focused on. And I think for us, like, there's personal implications and corporate implications. So personally, if you find yourself spending more time thinking about your situation, thinking about your ability, even thinking about your own development, if you find yourself thinking more about yourself and more about your circumstances than you do about God and what he's doing in your life and what he's done in the lives of others, when you're thinking about yourself more than you're thinking about God, it tends to produce a lot more anxiety, a lot more worry, a lot more fear. Contrast that with Joshua, who seems a lot more confident about his circumstances. And then I think corporately, even for us, we are now in a series on Joshua. We're going to talk about this particular character. We're just setting it up. We're going to talk about this character over the course of the next 8 weeks or something like that. But notice where Joshua's focus is on. It's on God. So corporately for us, even in a series on Joshua, what we're actually trying to consider is God, particularly in the person of Jesus. That we're going to learn about Joshua so that we can learn more about how to follow Jesus and about how a God follower can not just follow God well, but can actually develop into a leader in our own, lives and contexts.
Yeah. And so as we begin to wrap this up, when considering the early years of Joshua and especially the early years of his leadership and just knowing everything that we know through the passages, you are often talking about how we're not just here to listen, but to engage with the text and what we're learning. What would be your takeaway when it comes to the early years of Joshua's life? What can we actually, tomorrow or this week, like what can we begin to practice as we look at his life?
Yeah, well, I think because we covered so much scripture, you can go home tonight and pick an idea and then put that particular idea into practice. So the Exodus passage is a great example of developing in the dark and valuing hard work over being well known. That's not everyone's temptation in here. Some of us, that is our temptation. We 100% care a lot about what people think of us, about how we look, about how we're being perceived, how we're performing. Like, we care a lot about the opinions of other people. If that's you, I'm going to ask you, what would it look like for you to make a shift towards valuing your own development more than valuing just the opinions and the perspectives of other people? Perhaps it means it changes some of what you post, some of what you share. Perhaps you when you know that you're doing something just to get attention, it means that perhaps you're not going to keep doing that thing, and you're going to practice trusting God with giving you identity and giving you meaning and giving you purpose and all that stuff. And then I think when it comes to Joshua's example of being with other people, we'll start groups, and not this upcoming Wednesday, but the Wednesday after that, you are 100% invited to join a group and to stay for the duration of the fall and to invest in some relationships and just test it to see if you don't get closer to God as a result of being a part of a group. In the same way that Joshua ended up accomplishing more because of Moses and because of his investment, I think we as believers will accomplish so much more in our personal lives, corporately as a community, if we are connected to people who are invested in us. And then lastly, it's the side of focusing on Jesus, of keeping our focus on Jesus. Some of us in here, you are probably dealing with some substantial situation in your life that's taking up a lot of your mental space. You think about this a lot. the fact that I'm just hypothetical, the fact that you don't have friends, the fact that you are worried about, am I ever going to get into a relationship? Am I ever going to, find someone who actually likes me, or whatever the case is? Like, we could go on and on with different examples. If that's you, perhaps this week you pick a passage of scripture and you memorize that and you let that be the thing that you think about more than anything else. You direct your mind towards God and see if it doesn't change the way, it might not change your situation, but see if it doesn't change the way you go through your situation in the same way that it did for Joshua.
Yeah. And I even think as we were listening to the passage and just hearing the confidence that Joshua had, him and Caleb, when they were speaking to all those people and saying, like, God will protect us. God is not gonna, like, we don't have to be afraid. God is with us. I even think, like, how much of that confidence and that courage was given to him when he was listening to Moses tell stories and stories about the things that God has done for Moses. And so obviously God had given Joshua this courage and this strength, but I do wonder how much of it comes from hearing stories. And so even if I think we've done this before, where if it's your parent or if it's a leader, like asking, like, what has God done in your life? Like, even just, there's things that we probably don't know, where we don't know how God has answered our parents' prayers. We don't know, or like an aunt, an uncle, like anyone that, even if it's a friend, like, has God ever answered a prayer for you before? And just hearing their responses, and just knowing, like, God has been faithful in people's lives all around us. And if we ask and we hear those things, like, that might actually begin to build courage and strengthen us when we are facing things. And so we say it all the time, but our leaders are also always available for stuff like that if you ever want to talk. But yeah, that